Hi, and welcome to the Room for Reinvention podcast. Today's guest is Misty Lynch. She is the CEO of Soundview Financial Advisors. She helps women confidently pursue financial independence and entrepreneurship without sacrificing their lifestyle. Investopedia named her one of the top 100 financial advisors in 2021, and U.S. News and World Report named her one of the 9 women in finance to follow because sometimes you need life advice, not just financial advice. When she isn't at the office, she's usually reading mysteries, skiing the East, or coaching her kids' basketball and field hockey teams. This is a great episode where Misty shares a personal story, and she also shares a lot about how she got into finance and life coaching and how she loves working with women and men, but especially women entrepreneurs, and help them with their financial future. So let's listen. Hi, Misty. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you, Kim. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So, as you know, Room for Reinvention, this podcast is a podcast for women to share their reinvention stories. So, we would love to hear your reinvention story.
Yeah. So, I think it's interesting. I'm not sure how far back to go, but I guess, when ever since I was young, I kind of was focused on money. We had, my parents were self-employed, and my father's very successful in the 80s. And so a lot of, they had boats and cars and all the things in the 80s that you would expect people to spend a lot of money on and not really think about the future or saving. And then there was a recession in the late 80s, early 90s that impacted my dad's business particularly hard. And so at that time, we had sold the house we lived in. We got rid of our dog. We moved to a new town, a very small, guest house, I guess you could call it, apartment. And everything changed. Like in my 10-year-old mind, it changed overnight.
Yeah.
And so I always just had this strange outlook on money because it wasn't like I grew up in poverty, in scarcity the whole time. The first 10 years of my life, I was like, oh, money's easy. My parents never argue, we have all the things that we want. And then all of a sudden when we didn't, money was a topic that was discussed just about every single day.
Wow.
It was just always, something when you don't have money or you're living below the poverty line, it's almost impossible to not think about money.
Yeah.
It's always has to go somewhere. It's hard to come by. All of these things, whenever we got money, it was immediately gone, it felt like. And so I really just tried to figure out how to control money, how to have more of it. And I think I kind of just, went in that direction and got really fascinated by it. And so, when I started my career though, I didn't want to be like my family. I wanted a paycheck. I wanted to have consistency, a steadiness, I guess you could say, when it comes to finances. And so
insecurity, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I considered. I figured if you had money, everything would be okay. Now I know money does not solve every problem, but it solves money problems really, really well. And so I got a job, and at first I'd worked at an insurance company where I was in Connecticut. A lot of people work in insurance in Connecticut, and so I'd started in sales, but I realized nobody wanted to work with me as a insurance advisor, financial advisor, because I was in my 20s and I didn't come from any family. I didn't have any rich relatives to go talk to. And so I immediately was like, I'm a failure in this area. And then I moved into a corporate back office job in compliance in Boston. And so I did that for a number of years. But part of me always wanted to help people with their finances and their money. But there was a real fear and hesitation to go back to trying to get my own clients, talk to people, grow an audience, because I didn't feel like maybe people don't want to talk to a woman about these things. Maybe people aren't, maybe they do want to talk to, I'll still have people tell me that their dad or their uncle or some guy gave them some advice and it's gospel compared to, talking.
Oh, yeah.
And so, but after a certain point in my career, I'd worked in compliance for 10 years, made it all the way up to, the senior director level, and the chief compliance officer role was available, and I'd applied for it. I'd been pretty much the right-hand person for this job for a long time. And they ended up giving it to a guy from the outside who had a very similar resume. And so at that point, I'd had my second child. I was in my late 30s, and I was just kind of like, you know what? Like, is that it? Like, is this the glass ceiling? Did I hit it? Is this it? This is good.
Yeah.
Yet. And so I really just kind of had this change of heart. I'd been a certified financial planner since I was 31 years old. I just wasn't using it. I wasn't using it. And like a lot of women, we have all these credentials, we have all the training, and we'll study but honestly, I think it was just keeping me from going out there and trying to offer something and to help. Because I was like, well, maybe if I'm a little smarter, maybe if I'm a little more licensed, if I'm this, then people will, then it'll be easy.
Right.
So I ended up leaving a very good, high-paying corporate job with 2 young children. My husband and I are married, and he has a steady job too. But I was like, if I'm not going to go out there and help people now, like, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
I left my job in 2020.
Good timing.
But I will say, there's always, and this is a fascinating thing that I've learned about money and business from studying it for so long. There's always going to be something going on. There's always going to be some level of uncertainty in the world. And when the pandemic hit, not everyone was impacted the same way. Some people were home, still making money, reevaluating their whole life that had been on this track where you get in your car, you commute, you do this, you do that, you come home. And some people actually had a moment to breathe and were like, do I have to keep doing this?
I'm one of those people. Yeah.
And so the financial planning space didn't slow down.
Like,
actually, if anything, I felt like this was, this was an okay time to be there.
Yeah.
Helping people, because when you have all this uncertainty, the one thing that can help you continue to move forward is having some sort of a plan.
Yep.
Sort of an idea of what to do next, or, okay, and so it was kind of an interesting time, but it was really now or never at that point. And I talked to other people too that left their jobs in like January of 2020, and they're all doing pretty well now. But yeah, then 3 months later, the stock market drops and everything, kind of went crazy, but it's been pretty consistently steady ever since. And so I started working with my own clients. I started managing, people's investments for them, doing all the training that I thought was missing. When I would talk to advisors and compliance that were like, you confuse them, you move the money over, make it so they don't want to touch it themselves because it's over their heads, which I think it's not true.
Right.
And I think it's really important, even if my clients want me to manage their finances, that they know that they're capable of it. They could do it themselves. I want them to understand what they own, why they own it, what they have, and then at least feel somewhat like in control.
Yes. Yeah.
Finances. And so that space is huge. And there's so many, especially in our area, in the Boston area, there's so many entrepreneurs. There's so many women that are great at making money.
Mm-hmm.
Feel a little less confident in like investing money. Do they have enough of it? Like just those big abstract questions.
Absolutely.
To help them kind of figure that stuff out. And my career it's changed so much. If I went back to 2017, I would not recognize.
Wow.
I would believe you if you told me like all the things that I've been able to accomplish since I just stopped trying to figure out what other people would be.
I know.
After what I wanted.
I think it's so impressive that the experience that you had with your family, you were able to change. Because interesting, in 2020, when I started with this coach who has a, international education for photography, one of the main things, it was mostly women that were coming to her for training. One of the main things that she realized was it wasn't necessarily the photography skills that they needed. It was their mindset over money. And she actually got a money expert, and that's like part of the curriculum is money, because that's all tied to your value and what you charge for your services. But I did not realize that I had money blocks as well. And then the more I dove into it, I'm like, oh, a lot of people do. And there's shame around it. And then, so it's like, I think that the financial people that I've met recently are working on empowering, like you were talking about, and educating their clients. And it's like, you don't have to have $10 million to go to a financial advisor. You don't have to know everything, but I had to overcome those money blocks to get past that. And I think that affects a lot of people, right?
Yeah, and especially when it comes to business owners, and I work with a lot of people who are coaches or artists, or they're doing something where they're adding value to the world. People will happily pay for the services that they're getting. But there's almost this like stigma for a lot of women about like getting paid for what they do.
Yeah.
Like we're supposed to give everything away. And I guess I can see where that comes from. If you go back a couple generations, most of the women in our life probably were working unpaid or doing things that they weren't recognized for as much. And I think there is such a strange, a relationship with money that you almost have to get really comfortable with in order to do, to build your business, to put more out there and do well. And so it's great that your coach kind of focused on that, because they don't teach that in business school.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
And in 2020, I actually got a certification as a life coach because I realized that my clients' questions they weren't about returns and projections. They were about like questions that go back to like their biggest fears, like their sense of security, their sense of like safety, all of these things around money that like, it wasn't finances. It was like how their brain is working and like, I'm so smart. Why can't I save money?
Yeah.
There's a lot of patterns here that we need to talk about because you are smart, but I feel like, and some people feel that way with a lot of things. Like I understand what I should be doing, but why am I not doing them?
Yes, exactly.
Human brain. And so kind of going back into how can I help these people set up guardrails around these things or automate things so they don't even have to think about it. So the future version of them will be happy because they're constantly either focusing on what's happening right now, what's, their children need something or work, or they want to, all of these things that are competing for their attention and their money. They tend to put themselves last. But then when there's no one else that's going to come rescue you or help, like you got to stop doing that. And it's nice to be like a person that they could be honest and talk to this.
Right.
Because they might feel like, I've had some clients feel like I can't talk to my friends about this because they just can't relate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Business has gone and things like that. So
it's interesting because she also became a life coach, and she also talks a lot about overcoming the fear of, what you're going to charge and valuing that. But once you start attracting the money, it's keeping it. Yeah. So that was also a problem, like money leaks. That's one of her modules. And you can attract it, but it's like it's gone just before you get it.
And I think about my parents, and I think about my mother never intended to work. I don't think anyone, I think that she thought my father's, like she would be a stay-at-home mom and all of that. She ended up having to work in some pretty awful jobs to pay the bills. And my father stayed an entrepreneur, but he always had this money mindset. Like money was easy. He could make more of it. He could do this. What he never thought was that he would live past age 57, because that's when his father passed.
Oh, wow.
So who wants to save money for a 65-year-old retirement if you never in your mind see yourself getting there?
Yeah.
So I understood, like, he had those money leaks because he thought he was going to be here for a good time, not a long time. He's 78 now.
Yeah. So he was wrong, thank God, right?
Of course. And thank goodness. I mean, but I think about it, and I used to get so frustrated, like, how come he's not, like, but I guess in some people's minds, like, there's some serious thoughts that we feel like are true.
Yeah.
That are really just our thoughts that have gone unchecked for 40, 50 years.
Yeah. Well, when I saw this thing, it really changed my relationship with money. And I realized that I had my own blocks, and it was like growing up all you ever heard was, oh, we don't have money for that. We don't have money. We don't have money. And I found myself saying the same thing. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm like creating my own reality. You know, it's like what I say and what I focus on is exactly what I'm going to create. So if I'm always have that mindset, so I changed it. I'm like, no, I need to have an abundant mindset. But I also do think that it's also education. I did take an online class, just like a 3-week one, to learn about finances, especially being an entrepreneur or owning your own business. You know, I don't have that retirement and all of that set up for me. I have to pay my own taxes, and it's not easy.
Yeah, I think having even some sense of training is huge, because some of this stuff, and a lot of my business owners get it relatively quickly. They understand taxes. They've had to pay them. Mm-hmm. They know like income, expenses. They understand, maybe they've had debt, so they know how interest rates work from the flip side, but then also seeing it from, as an investor, you take advantage of, money in the market. Like, that time is on your side the more you let something grow, the same way people's debt expands if you don't, tackle it. And so I think people tend to get it it's not as overwhelmingly hard to understand as people think. So even a short course or talking with somebody can be very helpful to get that baseline understanding of personal finance. Because that bridge from like, I'm never going to have enough, we're always going to be in debt, I'm always going to be broke, to getting to this abundant mindset that some people say like, oh, money flows easily to me. Most people's brains will just be like, okay, no, that's not true. I can repeat it 100 times in the mirror. So it's those baby steps being like, okay, well, some photographers do very well financially. Mm-hmm. Some photographers, some small business owners create their own retirement plans. Like, to give yourself proof to get to the point where it's like, some people over here, me, and like the steps to get there. And that's where I can help people the most, is kind of building that bridge. Because I talk to a lot of people that are like, I'm trying to be abundant, and they want to believe these things, but their brain is hard to trick. But what we can do is say, okay, well, we can be somebody who manages, can manage money or can hit a savings goal. Because telling themselves they're a millionaire in their heads, it's like not true yet.
Right. That makes sense.
To get to that point where like, I could be a millionaire. Some business owners are able to retire. Some business owners are able to travel, are able to. And then you just find evidence of that instead of the evidence of, I'm always going to be broke, because your brain will serve up all those reasons why, yes, you're right, the car is going to go down, or I am going to have to replace the water heater, or all this stuff. And your brain is like a computer. It'll just answer those questions. But if you say like, okay, how could I save? It'll start answering those. You're just asking the questions you've always been asking.
So as a financial advisor, explain to me, I've never worked with a financial advisor, so I'm curious to, I'm sure it has to do with how people invest and what they're going to do with their money, correct?
My process is a bit different, and I'd interviewed hundreds of financial advisors when I was working in compliance as an auditor. And so I saw how other people did it by interviewing them. Most of them, their training formally was like, find out people's biggest fears, get the money over, and then like hope they don't call you again. Like happily refer anybody to an event. And that's really how people made a lot of money, is just being like, people will just leave it there and hopefully it'll be, you move on to the next person. But what I do with my clients is, even the ones that invest money, or some just want a financial plan and maybe their money is in their corporate 401k, or they're just starting out and they don't have investments yet. Everybody I do a financial plan with, which is where I bring in all the information, what they have for assets, what they have for debts, what they have for income sources, how much they spent, how much it costs to be them in a normal month or year, without any judgment around it.
Yeah.
Just what things look like today. And then I kind of look at some of the things that I suggest for them to do that could possibly put them in a better situation down the road. Maybe they haven't started investing or saving for the future. Maybe as a business owner, they could take advantage of some tax benefits from investing from the business, or, things like that. So I look at everybody's situation kind of specifically, because everybody's different.
Yeah.
And some people might have a spouse with benefits. Some might be both self-employed. Some might be single. Some might be divorced or widowed. Like all of these things are different. And there's usually there's nuances
Mm-hmm.
where somebody could take advantage of something, but maybe you can't. So the advice has to be really tailored to them. And then what I do is kind of build out some scenarios. If they have, what if I sold my business in 5 years? I build in those what if situations and kind of present them in like my reports and charts to say, okay, this looks like clearly a good idea. If we see like the numbers go straight up in green, you could tell like, okay, this would add so much value, or maybe this is a bad idea. And I could show people like, all right, if you take money out of your IRA to pay for your kids' college, you'll run out of money around age 70. And they might be like, oh, that's scary.
Wow, yeah.
Because then your children will have to take care of you. But if you save a little here and then keep investing for your own future, if things look better, you might be able to help. So those kind of like, I have to figure out what they really want to do with it. And some people don't know.
Yeah.
Some people get past, I just want to get out of debt. Or I don't know, I guess they give me the canned responses like retiring at 65 is like everybody's dream, but they can't tell me why.
Mm.
It's just like, wasn't that what you're supposed to do?
Right.
And, so it's kind of fun to work with people who really do want to, like, once they dig in, they can think about some bigger goals that they have and then can commit to those, because like, it's not those abstract, like someday I don't want to work, or maybe I'll buy a house someday. It's like, we're pulling in like a listing and populating an actual mortgage, and like, okay, if you had this home, like this is what the taxes would be and the costs and stuff. So it can kind of feel a little bit more real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make decisions.
I think it's so important because sometimes people, stick their head in the sand. And what you just said about taking out money to pay for your kids' school, it's like, you're not always thinking about the future. And having somebody, I know that my brother works with a financial advisor, and, he has helped them with their kids' savings for college and all of that. So it's so important to work with somebody and also to know what you're doing, instead of like, I tend to sometimes like stick my head in the sand because it feels too scary, but it's obviously the worst thing to do.
Yeah. And it's like, and you know what, I think that's why I like doing what I do the most, because I've seen scary. I've really seen scary. And so when some people are afraid, like, oh, what if, someone's mad at me if I don't go to their wedding? And I'm like, what's worse? My hobby, like being like a whisker from homelessness.
Yes.
Like, this is how close. So some people are really close, and it's hard to really imagine that because they've always gotten by or something. And so it's really important to say like, okay, well, if we just continue on this path, like, you'll have to live off of this much money. That will mean like limited choices. This might mean lousy health, and like, it's, for me, like, I don't want to scare anybody, but I do feel like there's other things that what's going on right now always seems the most important. It's like what's on fire right in front of us. Even though it's probably, not the worst, there might be other options here where down the road there's not. You can't borrow for old age. You can't borrow for, and so I try to say, okay, if you know that you're going to want to help your kids or your parents or somebody, we're going to put some money directly towards that. And that's going to be it. And then the rest, we're going to figure out a way to like accomplish all those goals. Because like, I know myself, I have 2 kids. I put a very small amount in their 529 plan since they were born, because I know I'm going to want to help them. But I also know that I'm not going to try to, burn my own house down to do it. So what's there will be there and theirs, and then we'll figure out the rest of the time. But I can feel good about it. Like, I don't feel like I'm doing nothing. And so I can move on and not stress out about it. And that's how a lot of people's goals are. They're not ready. And some people are like, I think I want to buy a house in the future. Okay. We'll see where they're managed. So maybe some of the money that they're saving is in a high yield savings account right now. Perfect. And then we take their other money that's maybe in the IRAs or 401ks and make sure that's invested differently. And we treat their money differently for the different uses it's going to have. Because some people aren't, they think, oh, I'm always conservative. Okay. You're not always aggressive. We don't always drive aggressively, through a school zone or wherever.
Yeah, right.
Like we have to look at everything kind of in a very, critical way to say, okay, if we might need this money to buy a house in the next 3 years, we don't want to put it at risk. We keep this here and then, figure out what we want to do with your long-term investments or your savings and how much is a good amount, especially if you're a business owner, because there's no human resources department saying like, hey, you're automatically enrolled at 5%. If you want to change it, you got to do a bunch of things. There is none.
Yeah.
People, and I saw that happen with my parents. Like nobody told them when they were making like $3,000 a week, like, hey, put some of this away.
Exactly.
Nobody told them that. And they were like, cool. They'd still to this day probably light it on fire before they put it in the same account. And I mean, this is why I'm this way.
I love it though. But you know what? I think the two things that are extra special about you is one, you've had the experience that you had growing up, so people don't, so you know what it feels like to both sides, right? Like having money, not having money. And then also I can really see where having the life coach experience helps, right? With the mindset issues. And do you happen to see, I see a lot on Instagram. There seems to be a lot more groups geared for women investing.
Yeah, I have seen it. And I think I've seen it in women investing. I've seen it in women in real estate. A lot of these, and I will say like the more that's, I just saw something saying that there's more single women homeowners than there are single men. I saw like 2 out of 5 high paid women were thinking about leaving their jobs last year. Like, I feel like, and I'm 42, I've got 2 kids. Like, I feel like there is this certain point where like, we're making good money. Like, it's not like, I mean, and I don't know if women are just maybe they want more information and they're tired of just waiting around for someone to or give it to them. And they're going out looking for it. And I think it's fantastic. Most of my clients are women. A lot of them are families, but it's the woman who sought me out and was like, you need to help our family. And a lot of times they're more interested in this than their spouses. And that's okay. It's just kind of these, traditionally like he handles money, she handles the little money and the budgets in the store, but it's not always that way anymore. And so I think there are a lot of women that are just like, okay, I know what I don't know. Is that like, and I need to figure it out. And it's great. And I mean, some people, unfortunately, like, now we're seeing our, if you're Gen X or, millennial, like, we're seeing our parents get older and having to help them and see, did they save any money? Do we have any? And like, they have to kind of rip the cover off.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a new level of, exposure and conversations, but, it is really nice to see the more information being shared and people out there that aren't trying to just be like, oh, well,
after I took that short class online and then, doing the coaching, I was telling my son, he's in high school, but he's going to be going to college in like 2 years. But I'm like, you know what, Seamus, you really need to, and I can help him, right? It's like, learn about finances. If you start young, don't do what I did. You know what I mean? If you start young. So I think that a lot of things are changing, which is great. Like you said, more women. And I read the same article about women owning homes, but really taking charge of the finances.
And like, I have a son and a daughter, and they're in 3rd and 4th grade. I can't imagine like my son or my daughter being like, unevenly able to handle their lives. Like, they're getting the same level of conversation. Like, I'm talking to them both. If anything, my daughter could run circles around my son occasionally.
Right.
So it's like, I feel like a lot of that is changing. And also, you might be more honest with your kid than maybe your parents would be with you, to be like, I made mistakes.
Yeah.
I need to do more. Because if you start, when you first get a job, if you start putting money in a Roth IRA, you might have $1 million before you're 50 years old. All of these things that I have to say, my mom didn't know. Like, my mom basically, she was, raised by like my grandmother, Italian family. Like, she knows how to cook and clean, and like, she was supposed to look beautiful every moment of the day. And I was like,
Yeah.
That was her, like, that was what was being into her head for, like, what you're supposed to do. Not, like, invest money, save here, like, think about, get an education on that part of it. It just wasn't.
Yeah. And we have access now to so much information.
So the 70s.
Yes, I mean, come on.
You can put it on the credit card.
I know it. Yeah, it's crazy.
So it's like I can't blame anybody for not. But now I feel like most people can't blame anyone. Like if no one taught you this in high school, like I continuously hear that, and it was like, okay, well, no one taught you SEO or branding or whatever, and you learn that for your business, so we've got to figure out the money.
Yep. Yep.
We're more than capable of it.
Yep. You're right. So, so the last question I want to ask you is, obviously you're, like you said, taking this leap in 2020, you're obviously like doing what you love. And I guess, is there any advice you would give to somebody that's, kind of nervous about taking the risk, but, they want to kind of take that risk to do their passion, their job? Like, what advice would you have?
Yeah, I would say that I didn't go into it blindly. Like I had saved. I had looked at, as far as my numbers, like I knew that I could probably go 1 year with my husband's income and the kids at their ages or whatever, and like I gave myself like a year to figure this out, and then I'd say, okay, and at that point I'll go back. Some people's runway is a little shorter. Maybe you give yourself 6 months to try to like get things going. Too long, and you might just get in that like analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
Hey, do I need a website? Do I need this? And it talked to me. I got a lot of. I found people who were doing what I wanted to do, and right now there's no limit to the amount of information you could find. Even just listening to them on podcasts, reading their books, like watching shows, following their social media, because like we're seeing the highlights, but also like it helps you if you're trying to figure out, well, where did they start? How did they get there? Maybe I can do that same thing too. And that'll just help give you that proof in your brain that it's possible. If you want to launch a photography business or things like that, there's so much information that you can get your hands on. But I would say know your finances, because that's what's going to freak you out the most, is running out of money.
Yeah.
And that is just a core fear that people have. And so I talked to a client who was starting a business, and he was afraid, like, people weren't paying his invoices. He was used to a corporate job. He wanted to go back so quickly that if he had more room to say, okay, nope, I am going to use my savings. That's what it's for, or that's why I did it here. Yeah. Because that temptation to go back to safety is going to be very strong. So, and sometimes don't give up your full-time job or your part-time job yet. Like, there's no shame, and I see a lot of go all in.
Yeah.
Rip the Band-Aid off, go all in, or, and I think that isn't for everyone. And I think a lot of people have built themselves up to having a few clients or a few contacts or being able to network while they have some money coming in somehow. And that can just be the difference between, giving up too soon.
Absolutely. I think that's the best advice. And my photography coach said the same thing. If you have to work, you have to work. And a lot of the people that I've spoken to that have been successful, that's exactly what they did. They either had the money saved up for a year or 6 months, like you said, or they still kept their job and did both until they could leave.
Don't have to. And that's where I've talked to some people about leaving, because we've said, okay, what if we shut this income stream off, and what if it's just this for a little while and goes up in year 2? And that's all the stuff that I kind of can model out for people. And then they just make a decision that's less based on like guessing and more like, okay, now this is all I have to do. Maybe that's 3 clients a month, or maybe that's this, and they kind of can back into that full-time paycheck that they had before. But yeah, the whole, commit, you'll see that. You'll see people who are like, I had nothing, and then I just,
yes,
this might not be you. And especially if you've got people depending on you. And if you don't, then maybe you do have a little bit more flexibility to, cut the budget or things like that. But it's really important to manage your mind and know that it's not going to be easy. Being an entrepreneur, like this, I thought this, where I'm at right now, running a firm, being self-employed, being able to walk to my office even, like that was going to be it. And I was going to be perfectly happy. I was never going to want anything more. And it's just not how we are.
Yeah.
You know, like, so always like take a moment to look back at where you've gotten to, and continue to set those goals and expect yourself to evolve and to change.
Yeah.
And like be okay with that, because what you dreamed about 5 years ago might not be the same now, but you've got to be open-minded to it. And like the shame and the guilt, like if you can manage your brain around it, it's really not helping anybody out.
Yeah, no, it's so true.
It's keeping you exactly where you are, because your brain wants to stay alive. You've gotten to this point and you've stayed alive. So anything else that you might change feels a little dangerous. And so all of those thoughts are really just to keep you stuck, not necessarily to keep you happy.
Yeah, and I think that having a plan is, it's like you said, it can shift, but if you don't have the plan and you jump in too fast, like you were saying, you could end up quitting. So you do have to, even though you're taking a risk, it can be a calculated risk, you can still have that protection, because if it's something that's really important, you kind of want to have that so you can nurture it, and it takes time. It's worth it.
Like they need oxygen, like they need money, and that, like, if there's none there, then it's immediately going to be like, okay, and like a lot of small businesses fail, and I don't think it's because there's not good ideas or hard workers. I think they probably just don't have enough runway.
Yeah.
They need to get off the ground, or the money and panic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that there's a way to kind of build up, like, okay, we could try it. And then also, like, if you do decide to go back to a job or an employer because you don't like being an entrepreneur, like, that's also...
It's all okay. Yeah, exactly. It's all good, right?
It's fine. And a lot of times we punish ourselves, and there's really no need.
No.
We're just trying to, like, live a life that we enjoy, and do the things we want to do, and whatever way you make that work is fine. But there has been a lot of, it's been different, watching the way people talk about corporate America and the culture, and, being an entrepreneur. And you know what? There's a lot of people that are happy in all those places.
Exactly. Well, where can we find you online, Misty?
Sure. So the easiest part is probably just to go to my website, mistylynch.com. That has, links to my business at Soundview, also the podcast, the show I worked on is there, and the book. So all of the things that I've done are kind of located there. So that's the easiest place. And then Misty Lynch CFP on social media.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and I love your podcast. I highly recommend it. It was great. It is great. I look forward to listening.
Yeah, I like talking to different entrepreneurs on the show, because there's so many of us that make a living doing the things we love to do, but I'm always super curious how people got there, and usually it's not a straight line. So it's fun to talk about people, how they, their path, just like you're doing, and really give some people some cool ideas about how you can actually make a living.
Yes. Yeah.
That you might not have thought of.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you very much for being on the show today. And yeah, everybody visit Misty's website for financial advice and good information. Thank you.